And thank you for watching KTN News. Welcome back to these morning conversation on matters to do with taxes. Our uchumi. Are we okoing our uchumi? Where are we? What do we need to do? What are some of the solutions that the government should be exploring to make it easier for Kenyans to survive in this country? And to have this conversation with me is Leonard Wanyama, Regional Coordinator, East African Tax and Governance Network, and Dr. Sheikh Salah, Tax Consultant and Social Justice Activist. Gentlemen, while we are going on the break, we are looking at solutions that the government could come up with, and just making sure that that Kenyans have it easy. But even before we start looking at solutions, Daktari raised an issue to do with the checks and balances that do exist. Kenyans went on elections in August last year, and they elected members of parliament who are just there to make sure that things are easier for them, that before anything is done, that is a safety net, representatives of the people, the people who enjoy devolved powers, delegated powers by Kenyans. And when there was public participation, statistics show that about 70 or 80% of Kenyans said no to the tax bill, then now the Tax Act. And where did we get it wrong with our MPs?
I would say this, looking at the history and the work that has been put in for public participation, what we have done is that we have built the awareness and let people know that they should take part in legislation processes through, for instance, participation in the Departmental Committee for Finance and Planning. I think this year they had 1,080 submissions, 300 online. So we have improved the quantity of participation in terms of submissions and so forth. But the quality of legislation that has come out of it has dropped. Now you have to look at this in line with the context, the political context in which that committee is working, the whole house, and the larger conversations you're having about the economy, but in that political context. And so the advocacy that has to come up has to now deal with that context to understand that. We have always said, for instance, by adopting human rights-based approaches, then we can begin to actively speak to this. So for instance, we are addressing the participation bit. I've just talked about that. There's the awareness now. People are really feeling the pinch. But as we were speaking in the break, there's the question of discrimination or non-discrimination, right? And the fairness question in that. For instance, if someone has a mortgage, why are they paying the house for someone else? So obviously for them, they are feeling that there's a fair unfairness on their part. Yet government is feeling like you have to play a part for your colleague or sibling, whoever it is in the nation. But then there's also now the other aspect of that, which is the empowerment question, right? Now, how are these taxes assisting, facilitating livelihoods for people? And on this now, we can talk about the question of how business is feeling, how tax burdens is affecting them. And then lastly, the legitimacy questions, why we are in law. We are in court all the time, because legitimacy is about the rule of law. So if we address it in that sense, then we begin to now chipping at the political context that may have placed quite heavier burden this year into the next phase of this conversation next year.
And Dr. I also wanted to pick your mind on the fact that we have members of parliament who are there to make sure that public participation is actually meaningful public participation, taking views of Kenyans. While Kenyans participated in these exercises, what their views included in the final report that ended up being the Finance Act? Or was it a question of go rubber stamp this because the bigger guy has said so?
I think there were two issues. One is they included some of the more volatile issues, issues that will create problems immediately. For instance, the one of, I think, minimum tax, or there was there were issues that were very bad in terms of even the way they were framed. So they included that because there was an outcry, not even the participation, but in the whole nation, that this cannot continue. But they did not include other quality submissions that are made to them. The 75% of submissions that were saying like housing levy is not necessary at this point. And then does it have to be implemented at one go? Do we have to have it now? Should we have first of all a law that's governing the operationalization of this before we can have the tax itself? So what they have done is, like for the housing levy, they change it from a levy to a tax. So at this point, it's not a levy, because if it's a levy, then it should have a specific use. It should have it's a fund for housing. It's not a fund for housing at the moment. It's commingled with the consolidated fund as it is. So I think what they were doing is they were trying to legitimize their process rather than the product. See, and in this country, it looks like some sort of a comedy I watched on BBC, where somebody says government, is about activity. It's not about results, So it looks like the government is now about activity. So what they were doing is they brought people together. We wrote a lot of submissions. Nearly, I think every Kenyan who's active citizen had something to say on the budget. But then in the end, they took what they thought is too volatile for them to handle, and the rest they just ignored. So there must be a way to make these people accountable. See, that's where we should go. There must be a way to make the MPs accountable. In fact, Kenyans should now look at themselves and say, should we have a political party having a majority in parliament? I think we should not. We should have, so that to make these guys difficult for them to actually operate and gang up against the citizens, we should have maybe too many parties, in parliament, so that the president will not have, just call his buddies and pass, laws that are not friendly to the citizens. So there are a lot of issues in that sense. Yeah.
And see, even when Dr. you talk about having several parties in parliament, that does exist right now, but we know what happened. People just crossed the floor because of...
But then I'm looking at, there's a coalition which had a majority anyway, regardless of whether people joined or not. Yes. I think the guys who came there didn't have much effect on that. But then the idea is, how do we hold these leaders accountable? Because whatever they're doing, we talk to them, they don't seem to listen to us. And it has become like, a ceremony. Every 5 years people are elected. The problem that's in the economy can only be solved if the leadership actually take leadership. They look at it and see there is a problem. So the question is, they are not even acknowledging there is a problem. So, especially Parliament is not acknowledging that there is a problem. And we're not seeing them having an activity, talking to each other, telling the Kenyans that, we have a problem and this is the way that we're going to resolve. You understand? What is going to happen is this. There is a huge debt which we are unable to pay, because imagine there's a month in July where I think the debt payment was more than the collections. So there was a deficit on collections in terms of just the debt payment. We didn't pay salaries. We didn't pay operations expenses for the entire government structure, but we paid debt, and we still had a deficit on that debt. So what is going to happen is we'll be forced to default. And when you're forced to default, just now I think it's Argentina, I think which has devalued its currency by 50%, meaning your small savings in the bank at the moment, you have 100,000, it will be worth 50,000. So Kenyans have to open your eyes and see what is coming at us is not actually going to be very nice. Instead of like things are going to be. See, we have this idea of we have had bad times before, so and things will just solve themselves. No, they're not going to solve themselves this time, because we have debt to pay. The shilling is losing value, and when the shilling is losing value, what happens is the debt is increasing. See, if this debt is in dollars, so every time the shilling loses a few, it goes up by a few shillings, the debt is going by the same amount. So we're not going to be able to pay. So we're going on a road to default. And if we default without our choosing, see, there's a way to default on your own choosing. If we default by default, in other words, it came to a day where we cannot pay our own debt, we become bankrupt. And when you become bankrupt, your currency will fall. There will be economic turmoil. Economic turmoil will lead to social turmoil. So the leadership must wake up. The Kenyans must wake up. Everybody must be awake to the fact that we might be in danger. Yeah.
And Leonard, now as we talk about all these issues, the president says he wants to go big on manufacturing and all these. We have our local manufacturing that have died for a very long time. We talk about Revitalization. We talk about Kikomi, the cotton mills in Kisumu, our sugar factories are on their deathbed. And these are just one of the areas that the government would focus on to create employment, to be able to get more taxes. And not only that, for the government to be able to just be self-sustaining. But we see the same government is privatizing farms left, right, and center. Let me just ask, is there a way that the government can improve service delivery on these institutions that it wants to privatize for them to be able to get value from them? And in terms of going into manufacturing, could that also be the main priority for the government as one of the solutions to the existing deficit and lack of money the country is in?
So, when we talk of like manufacturing and privatization and so forth, you can see this is a trend in terms of the meaning of policy and policy statements is becoming convoluted and whatnot. And this is essentially the consequence of being in a fiscal problem. You see, as it is right now, we are not getting what exactly it means to privatize, because in our minds, it's being projected as companies will be sold wholesale, right? Then the money put in elsewhere, or then directed to those companies that are more efficient and so forth. So there is a conversation there we need to have very clearly in terms of what is this privatization and how are we going to go about it? Because there is a very big trust deficit there. Who's going to buy? How are you going to buy? Because in that process also there is the three questions I was talking about: the loopholes, the wastage, and the corruption. Now, in terms of Kenya, even if you think of going into manufacturing, agriculture is still our mainstay. But then you see they are joined at the hip. Manufacturing is supposed to be the second stage after agriculture. So you produce and you manufacture. So manufacturing provides the value add. So unless you're saying this manufacturing will be uplifting agriculture, I think you're just going round in circles and you'll be stuck there. So the questions, for instance, is the companies that are going to focus on agricultural questions and value addition, those would be the ones that you would like to focus on, so that you then uplift. I think it's close to 70% of this country that depends on agriculture in various, whether it's livestock or crops and so forth, even aquaculture and so forth. So you have to look at those industries of manufacturing that will give the value add to agriculture. Otherwise, you won't be doing the uplifting that you require, especially if you are really concerned with ensuring a bottom-up agenda. Yeah.
Now, Daktari, privatization, should the government do it? Should they drop it?
Okay, privatization. I think there's nothing really wrong with privatization per se, because government should not be actually in some of these businesses. Because I think at a point, Kenya government owned wineries, you know, alcohol production, you know, and in one point they're saying we're going to charge excise tax on alcohol to reduce, it's a sin tax, right? To reduce the consumption of alcohol. At that point they actually owned some form of wine distribution and wine production. So you'll see that some of the businesses they own, they should not actually be owning. It's a fact. But then the question that Leonard has said is, who is actually going to buy it? How is it going to be privatized? See, the process, can we trust the process? Because the problem is not actually about whether we sell these enterprises. Some of them should actually be sold because they are a burden to the citizens. Yeah, some of our tax is being used to give to uplift a failing enterprise. You know, like we had a problem with KQ. It has been doing what? Very poorly for many years. You understand? It's an airline. Why should the government be investing in airlines? That's another question but how do you privatize these enterprises? You have to have an enabling law of privatization. You have to have public participation to actually ask Kenyans, should we privatize? First of all, give them the facts about these enterprises. Okay, we have one called KMC, which was built actually to uplift northern Kenya's livestock production, because that's where the meat is produced, but hasn't helped in many years until it was actually handed over to to the military.
Yes.
Now you can imagine if we handed over an enterprise for the military to run. That means we have failed ourselves. But the military should not be in businesses. So if you look at it critically and look at all these enterprises that the government owns, many of them should be privatized. The question is, can we trust
the process?
Or are we going to create an oligarchy that actually buys this and becomes rich by themselves without any benefit to the Kenyan taxpayer? So it's a matter of trust, it's a matter of process. But privatization, the government should privatize. Yeah.
And finally, because we're running short of time, I'll give you 2 minutes each in terms of 2024. What should Kenyans expect in 2 minutes?
I think, like they used to say when we were growing up, tighten your belts. The definition of meanings in taxation will change. As it is right now, the question of luxury is one of those that is always stretched. For instance, with alcohol and cigarettes, as we call them, sin taxes. But when you have betting, again, or sin tax. But then now, for instance, the government can determine luxury on things like weaves. And that's how it's continuing to stretch areas to tax. And so those kinds of definitions and changes will keep happening, because in those nitty-gritty details, that's when it gets the space. But for the citizen, I think I'd urge them to be more active. There is obviously the opportunity within the committee, but then directly, when their leaders come for rallies, I think they should pose questions directly about taxation. Those are the questions that then lead to the other health, water, other service delivery questions. But start from taxation. Put those questions directly to your leaders at whatever level, because that is their job. Being an active citizen is not about only showing up at parliament, but it is in every space, every opportunity that you get. Speak about how you want your taxes to be and how to be managed. So how do you want them collected, allocated, and spent? And also, if there are instances where people mismanage, we must call those people to account. Thanks.
Daktari, 2024, will it be easier for Kenyans in the next Finance Act?
I have my doubts. I think Kenyans should be, as you said, active citizens. Meaning, you have seen what is happening. You have seen the leadership that you're sending to parliament and to, the executive and all over the place. They are not being accountable. What should happen is we should demand accountability. For instance, there is this cloud over how much debt we actually owe. Somebody was telling me it's 13.4 trillion. Ours was saying it's 10 point something trillion. Some of the debts are so old that they are as old as Kenya. Understand? So we need to know exactly what is this debt about. We need to there's this proverbial middle class. For the first time, they're feeling actually the heat. Much of the time, they were just breezing. They were not having problems that other Kenyans were having. Now, people are telling me, my salary is not enough to actually feed my family and pay the mortgages. Things are going to be worse. But then, there are things that Kenyans can do to demand accountability. Accountability includes, as you said, when the leadership actually come to the grassroots, you put to them the hard questions that you have. Unless we do that, how will we actually ensure that they're using the resources properly? The other thing is, we are spending so much money in central government, the national government, while the county governments are actually suffering. Functions that have been taken to the government, like health. Ministry of Health is still being funded at full level, while health is a devolved function. So much of these things these questions have to be asked. It's not just the grassroots alone that should ask for accountability. It is for the middle class to come up and ask the hard question and say, can you people run this thing efficiently? Yeah.
And Leonard Wanyama, Regional Coordinator, East Africa Tax and Governance Network, Asante Sana, and Dr. Sheikh Salah, Tax Consultant and Social Justice Activist, asking us all to play our part, to ask the tough questions and to call our leaders to account, because we gave them a job to do. My name is Dennis Aseto. Many thanks for watching. I will be back at 10 a.m. for News Center. Enjoy the rest of your viewing. Asante.